on to the Subcommittee on Military Personnel of the House Armed Services Committee as we hear from witnesses on the planned reorganization of the POW MIA accounting community of the Department of Defense. Almost a year ago, this subcommittee held a hearing on GAO's report on their review of the Department's efforts to meet the 2010 mandate to identify 200 missing persons per year by 2015. And Dr. Paul Cole's report entitled, quote, JPAC's Information Value Chain, the Identification of Missing Persons, end of quote. The GAO report, and I hope our committee's interest and oversight on this issue, became what I believe is a catalyst for change. Reviews by the Office of the Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation and the Office of the Inspector General began shortly after the hearing on 31 March 2014. Secretary Hagel announced the reorganization of the accounting community based on the recommendation of the reviews. Today, the subcommittee will continue its oversight on this important issue to hear from our witnesses on how they came to the conclusions and recommendations announced by the Secretary and the way ahead for the reorganization of the POW MIA accounting community. The men and women, both in uniform and DoD civilian personnel, who perform this mission are very dedicated to this effort and have done incredible work in the past. I am confident they will continue as professionals as the Department moves forward with these efforts. I am hopeful to move forward with this endeavor as I firmly believe that we, as a nation, owe the proper emphasis, resources, and priority of effort to account for our missing persons from past conflicts and to bring closure to their family members. I would like to welcome our distinguished witnesses. Dr. Jamie Morin, newly confirmed within the last month. 2 weeks, even better. So thank you and best wishes. Director of the Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation, and DoD, Department of Defense, is so good on acronyms, CAPE. Mr. Michael D. Lumpkin, Assistant Secretary of Defense Special Operations, Low Intensity Conflict, performing the duties of Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Department of Defense. Ms. Davis, do you have any opening remarks?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to extend a warm welcome to Secretary Lumpkin and to Dr. Morin. Thank you for being with us today. Last year, the subcommittee held a hearing that highlighted the dysfunction and the challenges that plague the POW MIA accounting community within the Department of Defense. And as a result, Secretary Hagel took his responsibility head on here and asked Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low Intensity Conflict Lumpkin to lead this effort to resolve the many issues that confront this community. The Secretary proposed to establish a single defense agency to consolidate and coordinate the vast activities that fall under the purview of the POW MIA accounting community. The subcommittee supported this effort and included language in the fiscal year 2015 NDAA to create a more effective and efficient organization to be able to meet the goal of identifying at least 200 sets of remains a year by 2015. While the consolidation and the establishment of a defense agency is a positive first step, it's important for us to understand what the final agency will be comprised of, how will the transformation and the consolidation of activities, personnel, and resources be accomplished, and what the timeline for these actions will be, and what is really a fair timetable for the Department to accomplish the proposal and for the Congress and the American people, particularly the families and loved ones who have a service member who is missing or unaccounted for, to be able to hold the agency accountable for the increased transparency that the agency, of course, is saying that this will bring about. The transparency, the reporting, and certainly the identifications as well. Mr. Chairman, I know we have a moral responsibility to ensure that those who are missing and remain unaccounted for are returned home to their family and their loved ones. And I happened to see an article just now where a granddaughter is searching for a grandfather who died back in 1952, and that's not unusual. We know that occurs. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses and having an open and a productive dialogue today as we move forward to fundamentally change the POW MIA accounting community. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Susan Davis. I now ask unanimous consent that Representatives Richard Nugent and Tim Waltz be allowed to ask questions during the hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that Representative Glenn Thompson be allowed to submit a statement for the record. Without objection, so ordered. Dr. Morin, we'll begin with your testimony. As a reminder, please keep your statements to 5 minutes. We have your written statement as well as Mr. Lumpkin. Additionally, very likely we will be interrupted with votes. We will recess and then come back, and then each member who would like would have the opportunity for a 5-minute question period. So thank you very much, Dr. Morin.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Davis, thank you very much for the invitation to testify today and for the committee's continued commitment to ensuring that our families of service members have the opportunity to get closure for those who remain missing from our nation's conflicts. You know, the Department of Defense works very hard to ensure that we seek and recover the remains of our fallen heroes and that we can bring that sort of closure to the families. We're able to do so thanks to the authorities and the appropriations that the Congress provides for that purpose. And so we very much appreciate the committee's continued support for that effort and engagement on the reform process in this area. The Department very clearly has a solemn duty in this area and to provide our families of the fallen with the fullest possible accounting. As you mentioned, in 2009, the Congress passed legislation requiring the Department to increase its personnel accounting capability and set the goal of accounting for 200 missing personnel annually beginning in 2015. Despite a very strong commitment from the leadership of the Department and the hard work of many dedicated men and women across the accounting community, when the Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation Office looked at the community's progress towards this metric, it was clear that fundamental reform was going to be required to put us on a path to achieve the legislative goal. So in my testimony today, what I'd like to do is update the committee briefly on CAPE's recommendations for reforming an imperfect system. And as this committee is very much aware, in July of last year, the GAO study laid out in a very strong report the fact that a fragmented organization structure undermined the Department's ability to accomplish this mission. Deputy Secretary Carter tasked my office with the responsibility to assess the efficiency and the effectiveness of the personnel accounting community's structure and their processes, and to evaluate whether the 200 accounted for metric was a sufficient one for observing and evaluating the community. If I can just summarize in capsule form, our study confirmed many of the findings of the GAO report and extended on them in some respects. We determined, number one, that the Department should fundamentally reform the organizational structure of the personnel accounting community and should do so by unifying the Defense Prisoner of War and Missing Personnel Office, which we call DPMO, and the Joint POW MIA Accounting Command, which we call JPAC, into a single new civilian-led defense agency with a new name that brings together the missions. Second, we recommended that the Department add a medical examiner as the lead authority for establishing formal identification within the personnel accounting process. The third recommendation is that we rescope the activities of the Central Identification Laboratory and make that entity more focused and more efficient. And then fourth, we recommend that the Department complement the annual accounted for number goal with a broader range of appropriate metrics that really reflect the full range of efforts that are executed by the accounting community to include many activities caring for families of those lost. And our report includes a list of metrics for possible consideration. So in addition to those main recommendations, CAPE also identified a number of process improvements within the personnel accounting organizations. First among these, to improve transparency by categorizing cases for all of our conflicts as either active pursuit cases or non-recoverable cases, and engaging with and informing family members of the case status and the reasons for categorization. A second of these additional recommendations, and there's several more that I won't enumerate right now but are in the written report, is to establish a standard case management tool, really a database, that's accessible across the personnel accounting community, has accessibility for family members as well, and that includes all the appropriate restrictions and controls to protect data that needs to be protected by, but also maximize transparency. Our assessment is that these changes, along with many others that are identified in the report, will, if implemented, improve business practices and mission effectiveness throughout the community. And my team that worked on this report is closely collaborating with Mr. Lumpkin's team in the implementation effort. Bottom line here, in the report last year, GAO stated top-level leadership attention is needed to address the personnel accounting issues. My assessment is that's exactly what is happening. The CAPE study team presented findings directly to Secretary Hagel. Secretary Hagel listened to those findings, and that informed his decisions based on Mr. Lumpkin's recommendations to reorganize the community and improve its business processes. Again, we are pressing forward on this effort. We very much appreciate the committee and the Congress's continued support. I wanted to just close by thanking the excellent CAPE staff, a few of whom are in the room right now, who worked on this effort and I think produced actionable, concrete, real recommendations for the Secretary and Mr. Lumpkin that will help the Department to deliver on this important mission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What a positive report. This is very unusual in Congress. To see coming together with common sense. So thank you very much. And Mr. Lumpkin, we are having votes, and so 5 minutes, thank you, and then we'll recess and come right back.
Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Davis, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for your steadfast support for our service members and civilians who are missing from our nation's past conflicts and their families who wait for news of their loved ones. I respectfully request my written testimony be included for the record. The authorities and the appropriations the Congress has provided the Department of Defense have allowed us to continue to recover the remains of our fallen service members and provide answers to their families. From Dr. Miller's departure in early January to late June, when Christine Wormuth was confirmed as Undersecretary of Defense, in addition to serving as the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations in Low-Intensity Conflict, I also performed the duties of Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. In this capacity, Secretary Hagel tasked me with leading the Department's restructuring of its personnel accounting for past conflicts to more effectively account for our missing personnel and ensure their families receive timely and accurate information. The Department is committed to improving the services we provide families. The Department of Defense conducts accounting of the personnel missing from past conflicts to record and honor the deeds and sacrifices of our service members and the civilian personnel and the legacy of the loss endured by their families. The missing person is the purpose behind what we do. The families are our focus, and better service is our goal. The Department recognizes that we cannot recover remains in all cases. In all cases, however, we have a duty to provide designated family members the fullest possible accounting for their loved ones. Change, even for the better, is difficult. I appreciate this committee's support for reform, and I look forward to continuing to work with you. The Secretary's decisions to change how the Department conducts personnel accounting address deficiencies in process, workplace culture, and organizational structure. The decisions are based on dispassionate analytical assessments and informed by feedback from families and here in the U.S. Congress. Recognizing that to fulfill this commitment to the fullest possible accounting, the Department of Defense must do better. In March, Secretary Hagel directed sweeping changes to how the Department of Defense operates in this area. His decision was based on careful consideration and reviews from GAO and from CAPE, independent assessments, comments from DoD Inspector General, veteran service organizations, families, and the workforce. Secretary Hagel directed the establishment of a new defense agency that combines the functions of the DPMO, the Joint POW-MIA Accounting Command, select functions of the Air Force Life Science Equipment Laboratory. He directed that an Armed Forces Medical Examiner will be the single identification authority, making the process for past and current identifications the same. and oversee scientific operations in the new agency. The Department will work with Congress to realign funds for this mission into a single budget, allowing for greater flexibility and ability to respond more effectively. To improve the search, recovery, and identification process, the Department will implement a centralized database and case management system containing all missing service personnel's information. The Department is also exploring options to make this data more easily and readily available to families. Importantly, Secretary Hagel directed the Department to develop proposals for expanding public-private partnerships and identifying our missing to leverage the capabilities of organizations outside of government that responsibly work to account for our missing. Consolidating the organizations that work on past conflict personnel accounting is necessary, but not singularly sufficient for change we seek for families of our missing service members. The culture of personnel accounting and processes must change as well. The Secretary's decision to increase public-private partnership, make a medical examiner the identification authority and director of scientific functions, and focus on families as the customer are emblematic of the cultural and processal changes that we are seeking to achieve. Some of these decisions, particularly on the role of the medical examiner, are significant departures from how we've done business in the past. Implementation will require continued support for change from within the Department and from Congress. These decisions, however, are deliberate and backed by years of solid analysis from within the government and independent bodies. To build on our strengths and change the cultures, structures, and processes, we must take a rational approach, not one based on emotion, personal agendas, or bias. The Department will sustain and further develop the strengths of our past conflict accounting processes, notably scientific independence and validity. The Secretary of Defense has a long-standing personal interest in this Department mission and feels compelled to improve the Department's operations and how we support it. I have welcomed the time I've spent working on this noble mission and have appreciated working with the committee and others in Congress to more effectively account for our missing personnel and ensure their families receive timely and accurate information. I do thank you for your continued support, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lumpkin. We will now recess, and when we return, we'll have a 5-minute question period. And I want to thank in particular Craig Green, who is going to be monitoring our 5 minutes. He himself has just been a great resource, working with just great capability on the issues of POW MIA. So we're very fortunate to have Craig Green for everyone to call on. We are in recess. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call the Subcommittee on Military Personnel of the House Armed Services back to order relative to issues of POW MIA. We now will begin with questions from persons, and indeed we've been joined by Congressman Rich Nugent of Florida. Delighted to have him here. And I'll begin first. Again, Craig Green is going to be maintaining the time, including me. And then I'd like to point out that one of the most meaningful experiences I have had in serving in Congress is to visit a recovery site 40 miles outside of Hue in Vietnam, to see the dedication of the personnel, American and Vietnamese, for the recovery of remains of 2 pilots of an F-4A on the side of a hillside which went down. Was just very inspiring to me, and I just want that to be the case. Equally, though, I was concerned, the letter by Congressman Glenn Thompson, he has a report here that we'll be giving to you, and I hope there's a response back, concerning the case of Major Lewis P. Smith III, who is missing in a plane crash in Laos. And he was, the site was on a list for recovery, but in the meantime, a dam has been built, and the waters of the dam now cover the site. And certainly to me, that should have been an issue that should have given expedited interest for the recovery. But we will have this letter for you, and for the family of Major Smith, I would like to see your response. And so at this time, Mr. Lumpkin, before making your recommendation to the Secretary, how much consensus did you have among the accounting community? And how has the department, and has the department finished the implementation plan? And if so, do you have a copy of the implementation plan?
Thank you very much for the question. As we were doing the initial assessment based on one task by the Secretary and looking at both the GAO report, the CAPE report, as well as numerous meetings with veteran service organizations, families, members of this committee and staff, and over on the Senate as well, I would say that there was unanimous consent that change was needed. And we worked through the different issues and proposals and socialized the potential possibilities for change and where change was needed and the important aspects that need to be changed. And I think the most important piece that we came to the conclusion is that, and this is kind of a business perspective, but I think is that who's the customer here? And the customer was realized that we hadn't been focused on the families as much as we could. And so what we've done is we've realigned. I think that was the central theme that everybody that was absolutely could get behind, was that we need to focus on families as the customer, because the missing service member can't speak for their case. So, and because of the deep concern with the families, I think that's the underlying piece that that everybody agreed upon. And then how we built it and the way to organize and make the recommendations, there was general consent, and some of them we had to work through. But I would say generally there was consent across the board. Now, as far as the timeline and what that plan looks like, we had 30 days to put together what needed to be changed. And now we're figuring out some of the mechanics of how. So the implementation plan is not completed as of yet. I will tell you it's broken into 3 different principal phases. The first is unifying the mission set for the agency, this single agency, as we consolidate these different pieces. The second piece is the process. The one thing, as I mentioned in my opening statement, is that we need to focus on is a singular process for all cases of those that are missing and unaccounted. And then the final piece is the people and how we're going to properly align the people in order to support the mission, because we have a tremendous and highly skilled workforce that is passionate about this mission, and we need to make sure we remove those barriers that have impeded them from being successful, largely bureaucratic barriers. And Secretary Hagel is adamant about cutting bureaucracy whenever possible and enabling the accounting community team to do the mission at hand. So our timelines that we're looking at is we're looking at an initial operating capability of a new agency at the beginning, January 1st, 2015, and to have a fully operational capable agency on January 1st, 2016. And this may seem like a protracted timeline, but some of these changes do require, in order to create the single agency, are legislative. Some we have to realign budgets within, and we have to realign the workforce, and that takes time to do. That said, while we are focused on rebuilding and reconstituting it's kind of the accounting community, it's essentially like flying an airplane while you're building it, because we're not going to cease doing the mission today. So we're going to continue to do the mission today while we're creating this new accounting agency.
Well, this is very encouraging. As you say, change needed. It's impressive to me, without recrimination and apparently, hopefully, without turf protection. And I want to thank you for addressing the issues of fragmentation. And indeed, Dr. Morin, the funding for this, with the constraints on Department of Defense and issue particularly of sequestration, what's the status of funding?
So, Mr. Chairman, I would divide the status of funding into 2 pieces. The first is the administrative or clerical task of realigning the streams of funding, right? So we'll be standing up an individual organization that will bring together multiple organizations, it needs to have its own concrete and coherent stream of funding. The DoD comptroller and my staff are working that issue to ensure that when that organization becomes operationally capable, it's got the line on the resources it needs from an administrative perspective. They also need support in areas of contracting and financial management and all of the other administrative areas necessary for them to be successful. So we're working that piece. The second question is just how many resources are applied to this mission. And as you know, this is a mission where the department has invested significant resources. The department added additional resources after the enactment of the 200 accounted for per year goal. Didn't see very much in the way of return in terms of additional identifications. Obviously, each identification is its own case with its own details. Some come comparatively easy, others are the product of many, many years of work. But what we need to do, in my estimation, the estimation of the CAPE team, is focus on implementing the reorganization and the reforms that are laid out in the reports and the action proposal that Mr. Lumpkin has put together, and then assess whether that streamlined and more effective organization is able to deliver sufficient capability, sufficient identification, sufficient service to the families in order to be deemed successful, or whether the Secretary needs to add additional financial and human resources to get there. We simply don't know how efficient that redesigned organization will be until we've given them a chance to stand up.
Well, thank you very much. Keep us informed in however we can be of assistance. Ranking Member Susan Davis of California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to both of you. Secretary Lumpkin, could you please, within that time frame, you talked about the 15 to 16, the initial work, and then after 16 to be at full capacity. Could you give us a little bit more details about what that's going to look like within that initial phase, initial year? And do you need any additional authorities to accomplish this effort overall? Do you anticipate that?
The Congress thus far, and this committee in particular, has been very supportive, and with Representative Nugent championing the amendment for the midstream legislative proposal to support this realignment has been the first step for us to get things moving forward. And we're also looking at a reprogramming right now for this fiscal year of funds, unobligated funds, to go against this new agency. And this is important for many reasons, because we are going to have expenses that occur in support of standing this organization, this new agency up. But it also is a shot across the bow to all in the Department of Defense that we're at the point where we can't turn back, nor are we going to turn back. Mm-hmm. And it's symbolic of the Secretary's commitment that we're going to get this done, and we're going to get it done right. So as we move forward, those are the initial steps that we have taken in order to get to the initial operating capability of 1 January. What we have done is we've assigned a senior executive, Ms. Alyssa Stack, and she is working as the program executive officer full-time to support and build this realignment and restructuring of the accounting community. So she is building, she has a team that she's been given. She's been given resources. We've brought on contract support. We've brought on and given her the tools necessary to flesh out a complete schedule on what the timeline in order to make that fully operational capability of 1 January 2016. And I would propose that quarterly, at a minimum, I come up and talk to y'all and to keep you updated, and at the first opportunity to lay that plan out when it's completed. And then Alyssa and myself, or a representative, would come up and talk to you and walk you and to keep the in-progress reviews as we move through, because I value your insight and as we move forward and get this restructured. Because we have an opportunity that doesn't happen very often when you're in a program, and that's to do kind of a Control-Alt-Delete and reset. And we have the opportunity to do this, and this is the Secretary's commitment, is to do it right, do it well, and do it once.
Okay, thank you. So you're not really feeling in a position to give us a little bit more of what's in that year, but to bring it forward
I would like a little more time, so I can put it in a nice, tight, crisp package for you, so it answer all your questions, so not create more for you.
Great, thank you. Dr. Moore, could you, we know the tight budget situation. There probably are going to, hopefully, there'll be a few instances with the consolidation where we gain some efficiencies, but on the other hand, you're going to need more money and possibly. I guess what I'm wondering is how you might protect some of these different funds that we're trying to bring together as we go through some more difficult budget cuts. How do you think that's going to play out?
Absolutely, Mrs. Davis. I think that's a critical question for the department, and Mr. Lumpkin referenced the reprogramming. So on behalf of my former colleagues in the comptroller world, that's a package that has just come to the Congress now a couple of days ago. There's $2.5 million in there requested to initiate activity in the new agency. Prompt approval of that will let the process begin, so we'd certainly appreciate that. Looking at the overall resource picture, just to keep the magnitude in your mind, this is, in recent years, has been a $100 million plus per year enterprise. So not a trivial commitment of taxpayer dollars, but not a trivial debt owed to the families of those who were lost and the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who are still carried on the rolls as missing. But we do certainly have a clear obligation to stewardship here. And so that's where I would like to give the work that Mr. Lumpkin's plan has laid out a chance to work and see how it works. And at that point, assess where the resource shortfalls are. The department, back in the fiscal 2012 budget submission, applied very significant additional resources to this enterprise, taking it from what was typically a $60 to $70 million a year undertaking to, well over 100. And so some of those dollars were lost to that enterprise as a result of Budget Control Act reductions, headquarters staff reductions, and the like. And some of it, frankly, for example, in the case of JPAC, the Pacific Command, assessed that given the challenges there and the fact that hiring freezes were in place, that they wouldn't be able to spend those resources, and so reductions were made in the year of execution to respond to the crisis of sequestration. No question, but those things have had an impact on the ability of the community to deliver. Again, our assessment is the bulk of the problem was an organizational structure that needed addressing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. We now proceed to Congressman Walter Jones of North Carolina.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And Mr. Lumpkin, I listened intently or carefully, maybe is a better word, to you and the doctor's comments. And mine's going to deal primarily with the comment you made about we realize that we need to strengthen, maybe that's my word, the public-private partnership. A few years ago, I was contacted by Mark Noah, who is the person that put together History Flight. And Mark came to me because he was having trouble getting information from JPAC, and we were able to intercede, working with the Department of Defense, to help him have access to records. He has his organization since 2010, and it's a private organization, has 117 total identifications. In the year of 2014 alone, he has already 36 recoveries to date. I know you're talking about reorganization and hopefully making for more efficiency because of the families and the loved ones that never came home. But he is saying to me that for his recoveries, it costs an average of $150,000, where when the federal government goes out to recover, it's somewhere around $1 million. I hope that Secretary Hagel, who I have great respect for, that you will look seriously at these entities like History Flight, who have a reputation, who in many ways is doing a much better job than the federal government. And I would hope that we would learn from these private entities who are making such impressive recoveries at their own expense. And I will tell you, I've never met a person more committed than Mark Noah to recovering these families, their lost loved ones. I mean, he flies for Federal Express. His monies, I don't think he gets any reimbursement, nor do I think he's asked for any from the Department of Defense. But I would like to hear your comment because on the fact that these the public partnership is going to be strengthened, because to me we're losing a valuable asset that could help these families bring home their loved ones and bring that sad chapter to an end. I'd like to hear your comment on these private entities, specifically my comments about History Flight.
Thank you, sir. I've met Mark Noah numerous times. He and I are in regular contact. I've solicited his input as well as that of other private organizations on how they do business and where we can find opportunities to work together. So please understand that I have personally sat down with Mark on numerous occasions to find out how he's doing business and how we can partner to work together, both government and History Flight as a private organization, and organizations like History Flight, in order to bring home those that are missing. So he has been integral to our public-private venture, and largely he has a very good and robust investigative arm, as well as a excavation piece that he does. But there's other organizations very similar that do it with great acumen, and we are working with them to make sure we can get the relationships codified and the requirements, both safety requirements on the site, get the proper permits done, and ensure we can repatriate remains in a proper fashion, and all of the things that go into it are some of those costs that the government, U.S. government bears, whether History of Flight does the excavation or DOD does the excavation. So absolutely, I hear you loud and clear, and he's one of those people that we're talking to, and we see him as a partner.
Mr. Lupkins, probably sometime as we move forward, I would appreciate if maybe in September, if my office contacts you, that you could come to my office and kind of give us a update and a briefing on these relationships, because I think in this tight budget time that if we can come together and find the remains, but also to cut the costs, which maybe will allow this government to even do more for the families. I understand very quickly, I know my time's up, but that there are currently about 78,000 missing World War II veterans and about 16,000 missing from the Vietnam War. And if we don't start to really make a commitment, and if it has to be from outside sources working with you in the leadership role, let me make that clear, which I would support, then I think we're missing a great opportunity to do God's work. Thank you.
If I may, I would welcome the opportunity to come brief you in September or whenever convenient for you. Please understand is that as we're looking to build to the capacity of 200 identifications a year, the public-private partnerships are part of the strategy to get to that capacity.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. We now proceed to Congressman Austin Scott of Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to follow up, too, on what my friend Mr. Jones was talking about. And we have widely accepted that it's over 80,000 service members. The number Mr. Jones just gave was right at 94,000. What number are you comfortable with as far as the unaccounted for? What do you believe that number?
I believe the operating number is in the vicinity of 83,000 that are unaccounted for. Please understand that a vast majority of those are realistically not recoverable, lost at sea. Mm-hmm. And so as we look at this in the future, we have to categorize people, the missing, accordingly, so we're putting the resources against those that are cases.
Of the 83,000, and we certainly understand that in these horrible situations, somebody lost at sea that may never be recovered. How many do you believe are recoverable?
I've seen estimations between 19 and 28,000 are deemed to be effectively recoverable.
All right, so let's use 25,000, kind of in the middle there. If we do 200 a year, that's 125 years. And I think that's where, as we move forward, and I certainly appreciate your willingness to work with the private sector, as again my friend Mr. Jones was talking about, but that's just too long. And my grandfather was a POW in World War II. He made it home, fortunately. Some of his friends didn't. Some of the people that were on the plane with him when it went down didn't. But that's, if we just do the math, the simple math is that comes out to 125 years. And so any way we can bring in the private sector is something I think that we have to do so that these families can get closure on this issue. As we go forward, I know the recovery and the lab work, the repatriation, all of these things will have to continue as we go through the restructuring. Are you confident that you have the framework in place so that there is not a disruption in the process of the recovery while these changes move forward over the next several months?
I believe we have the framework. I think we've built the framework, and then we have the commitment of the Secretary, who's made his guidance very clear to the defense enterprise that this is going to happen. So all are on board, and so I feel that we have the tools necessary to continue operations while we stand up this new agency.
And how long do you expect it to take to stand up the new agency? When do you expect, and when do you expect it to be completed?
We expect initial operational capability on 1 January 2015, and then fully operational on 1 January 2016.
And while this is happening, who will handle the current recovery and lab work and repatriation?
JPAC, which the Joint POW MAA Accounting Command in Hawaii, will continue to do its mission as currently stated, and the Defense Prisoner of War Missing in Action Office here in Washington, D.C. will continue to do their job, and the Life Science Equipment Lab in its current structure will do its job. So we're building something up while we're shrinking those capabilities down to make sure that it is seamless.
Okay. Thank you for those answers. I again want to go back and reiterate the point that if we have 25,000 missing in action that are recoverable, and we only achieve 200 a year in returning them to their families, that's 125 years, and that's any way we can bring the private sector in and others to help us increase that pace is something that I hope you'll continue to work with us on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Congressman Scott. We now proceed to Congressman Rich Nugent of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to be here today in this setting. I want to thank both Dr. Moran and Mr. Lumpkin in regards to how you're moving forward. I think you're using a very deliberate approach in regards to getting this transitional person in there early to start laying out where you're trying to go. And I'm not going to really ask any specific questions just because it's so early in the process. And I do appreciate, Mr. Lumpkin, your willingness to come back here on a quarterly basis to apprise us as to how this process is moving along. And I just think anytime you can merge two organizations together, I mean, there's going to be some hiccups along the way. It sounds like you're going to be able to continue to do the job that's necessary to do within the next year and a little over a year. But I would, I guess my question falls along where Mr. Scott was going with the 25,000 plus that we think are recoverable. And if you really did push that number out 125 years, I mean, most families wouldn't even know. I mean, there's such a distance between the death, date of death, the missing to come up. How do you prioritize in regards to going out to locate remains to bring them back and give them the proper honors they deserve? How do we prioritize that?
It's an interesting question because it's an evolving process. As you're aware, prior to 2010, recovering those missing from World War II were not part of the Department of Defense's mission set. So that was through legislation that was created. So we had a number of 65,000 plus that were added virtually overnight. So from 2010, we've restructured and we've relooked at how to do business is to focus on, because you have multiple kind of lines of effort, and they're frequently based on conflict. In the sense that Southeast Asia, for example, there's been numerous decades of work and research done to build the intelligence and the information in order to where to go in order to do an excavation to recover the remains. So we have very mature case files. North Korea and Korea, for example, North Korea, there are significant access problems currently, which makes it difficult for us to work in the field on those particular cases. And in World War II now, since it's been added to our mission set, we're spending a large part of the effort building the case files to get the intelligence and the information of where those missing are actually at. And this is where many of those in the private sector have been working these issues for years and have done a lot of research that we can build on. So maybe I'm being optimistic here, and I like to be optimistic and plan for it. But I believe that we're going to see a period of time, if we open up effectively our public-private partnerships, we'll see the opportunities with regard to identifying those missing from World War II increase significantly as we're able to increase our capabilities of research on that effort and working with public-private in that forum in order to harness all the great work they've done in the research and to build the case files. I'm very optimistic that we will build the capacity significantly in the coming years.
Well, I think it's great.
But if I may just finish, is that I said in my opening comments is that change, even for the better, is painful. Mm-hmm. It's difficult.
Always is. And
it is. There's, over the years, because where we have gone is that we've built the accounting community by bolting a piece on there, and it's built into this thing. All great people working hard to get the mission done. But I think that's why we're here at this point of where it's a natural inflection point for reorganization.
And hopefully, as you do move along this reorganization, is that one component, or at least somebody, is given the responsibility to work with those non-government organizations to get more bang for our buck. And the whole idea is it's not about the dollars. It's about bringing these folks back home.
Absolutely, and closure for the family.
Absolutely,
because they're the center of this when it's all said and done.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So I would hope that that's part of the equation, to have somebody that's responsible for and it's accountable for working with those groups to get more access.
It is.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Nugent. We'd like to thank both of you for being here today. And again, we're all very appreciative of the competence and capabilities and the dedication of the people who are working on these issues. And I want to join with Congressman Nugent, too, to wish you well as they are merged and in the interest, again, of our veterans and military families and current service members, too. There being no further business, we are adjourned.